You're listening to the Catholic Wives with Toxic In-Laws podcast. Today's episode is about how toxic in-laws create a loyalty split in your marriage. Are you a Catholic wife grappling with challenging in-laws? The Catholic Wives with Toxic In-Laws podcast is your sanctuary for navigating the sometimes stormy seas of life with toxic in-laws while being validated for what you've experienced. Join me, your host, Miriam Susan, a Catholic wife who's weathered 3 decades of in-law drama, as we tackle the tough issues you're dealing with head on. Hi, Miriam Susan here. Welcome to today's podcast episode where we're going to be continuing this series I've been doing this month of February 2026 about energy and how, not like woo-woo energy, but how our emotional and spiritual and sometimes even physical energy is drained and just spread too thin by toxic in-laws. And so today we're going to be talking about how our toxic in-laws can create this split of loyalty when they take up this level of importance in their marriage. And I just realized I forgot to create my sign that I talked about last week to demonstrate this proper order of a Catholic family, because it pretty much comes up in nearly every episode that I do solo. And a lot of times when I do interviews on other podcasts, because it is such a core foundation of what our marriages are supposed to be like. But let's get into the topic for today and look at our scripture reference. Today's reference is from the Gospel according to St. Matthew, chapter 12, verse 25. And this is from the New Revised Standard Version Catholic Edition. And it says, "Every kingdom divided against itself is laid waste, and no city or house divided against itself will stand." And this directly ties into it, because this is often what happens when we have toxic in-laws who are kind of infiltrating our marriage. And I use the word infiltrating intentionally because that is what it's like. It's like an attack from the outside, like an enemy would infiltrate a fortified, fort. That's what it feels like when we have these outside influences from our in-laws that are not always welcome, right? And it causes this division within our own families if we allow it to continue. Now, when your husband's loyalty is split between you and your children and his parents, your marriage cannot thrive. It can't. He's not a bad person, so I don't want you to feel like that I'm attacking your husband. He's just stuck in what ends up being like this impossible position, trying to be a good son and a good husband at the same time, but not realizing that the good son programming from his childhood is actually undermining his ability to be a true and godly husband. And you can't address all of this. And you can't address this until you understand what you're actually dealing with. So you might have familiarity with a scenario where you have this moment when you realize that you and your in-laws are on opposite sides. And your husband is doing his best to try to keep everybody happy, but that doesn't work with toxic in-laws. Remember, we're talking about toxic in-laws who are demanding and controlling or manipulative and maybe deceitful. And when you're trying to keep people like that happy, there's no way you can make them happy. There's always the next goalpost that you have to achieve once you feel like you've achieved the first one. So if it's like, well, we don't see you enough, so then you start visiting once a month. Well, that's, we still don't feel like we see you enough. And so then it becomes every 2 weeks. And then that's still not it keeps moving and moving because they're toxic and it's not a healthy relationship. So really when I say toxic, I'm talking about a disordered, an unhealthy, a relationship that is categorized by patterns. I mean, seeing things more than 3 times, patterns of behavior that don't help you get to heaven. Desiree Cifuentes talked about that in the interview that I did with her, and how if we have relationships in our lives where those relationships are not helping us move forward on this path towards sainthood, towards heaven, then we need to let those relationships go, or at least keep them at arm's length. So this split loyalty can also look like your husband defending his parents' behavior to you, and then turning around and trying to defend your feelings to your in-laws, but never really actually taking a stand for you on behalf of his parents. So he can defend you, but never really says, okay, so when you do this, it's very upsetting to my wife and it needs to stop. There's a difference there. You see, him standing up to his parents is very different than just explaining away what you're feeling. And oftentimes with really toxic people, that ends up being fuel, or I don't know, just something that your toxic in-laws kind of keep in their back pocket to then pull out later and say, oh, well, she's so anxious. She's so emotionally volatile. She gets her feelings. Those conversations tend to come back and bite you in the rear, because toxic people love to exploit our weaknesses and turn them against us. So what does this split loyalty look like? Well, it can be where your husband agrees with you in private, but then doesn't back you up in front of his parents. Let's say you and your husband talk about no more spending the night at grandma and grandpa's house, but when it comes up, when his parents ask about it, he just kind of caves, or just lets it happen, or maybe even throws you kind of under the bus and says, well, Miriam really doesn't want the kids to spend the night at your house. And sometimes that's even worse than just letting it happen, because then again, they have this thing to hold against you in the future. It could mean that this split loyalty looks like he makes promises to you and then breaks them when his parents apply pressure. Like this whole thing, going back to spending the night at grandma and grandpa's house. Yes, we're going to commit to doing that. But then when his mom or dad's like, oh, but we haven't seen the children. Oh, but we wanted to do a movie night and sleep in the living room and have popcorn and ice cream. And then he caves when there's pressure applied. It can also look like your husband framing every conflict as, why can't everybody just get along? Instead of recognizing that there is a real problem to deal with. Now, this is, again, about patterns. If this happens once a year, that it does not qualify as a pattern, unless you only see your in-laws once a year, and then maybe it might be a pattern. These are about things that happen consistently over and over again, and they never improve. It can also feel like you are constantly competing for his loyalty and coming up empty-handed and losing in this competition. And then this split loyalty can also look like him getting defensive when you bring up his parents, but doesn't get defensive when they criticize you. So it's this double standard, really, is what it is, where your husband can say certain things in private, but then when he's with his parents, it's like he's this little boy again, and he's trying to please them, or he caves into their demands and then doesn't defend you. That's what the split loyalty can look like. Now, why does this exist? Why is this even a thing? Why do we even have to talk about this? Well, it goes back to this good son programming that your husband has been subjected to, probably since he was born. Now, he has been trained since childhood to keep mom and dad happy, to meet their needs, and to not disappoint them. And he has internalized that disappointing them equals being a bad person. And he doesn't realize that this, good son behavior in childhood becomes dysfunctional when you slip this ring on. And when you ask your husband to choose you, he feels like you're asking him to be a bad son, even though what you're asking him to do is to be a good husband. And this programming doesn't just extend to relationships. Just yesterday, something happened. Oh, no, it was this morning. It was actually this morning. We have an issue with one of our vehicles. And my husband said that he feels like whenever an issue comes up with our car, we've had a lot of car issues lately, from tires to oil pressure to not starting, needing new batteries. Like in all of our vehicles, we've had issues with our cars. I don't know what it is. You know, that whole thing, when it rains, it pours. It's been pouring, and it's all pouring out to the auto shops. Anyway, this morning, there was an issue with one of our cars. My husband gets a text from our daughter. Hey, it's having this issue again. I don't know what to do. What should I do? Immediately, my husband says, I feel like I've done something wrong. I feel like I have failed in a certain way. That kind of programming, number one, is a complete lie. And I told him that. I was like, that is a lie. You have to recognize that is a lie. Cars are just going to have issues. They're going to get flat tires. The batteries are going to die. Oil pressure issues are just going to happen. Things happen, and it's not anybody's fault. Usually. I mean, sometimes things are people's fault. But this is an instant where it's not his fault. But because of that good son programming, it is carried forward into his 50 plus years of life and now applies to pretty much any problem. He now thinks it is his fault. If this resonates with you, please leave a comment because you need to know that you're not alone. My husband needs to know that he's not alone. I want to show him comments and say, yes, my husband thinks the same way. Yes, my husband says the same kind of things. He takes on all of the problems of the family because of this good son programming and puts them on his shoulders, even when they don't belong there. This is really, really hard programming to change. Like I said, my husband is over 50. We've been no contact for, actually, it's been 7 years to yesterday from when I'm recording this. I'm recording this on Ash Wednesday. 7 years that we've been no contact. And still, this programming exists in his mind. And so this is so hard to change. And for us, if we don't have this programming, it seems like something that we can just tell him and it can just be fixed. But it is so much deeper than that. We're talking about neural pathways where certain thought patterns are so ingrained because they happen over and over and over again that it is like a very well-worn path through a forest. There's no weeds, there's no branches, there's no trees in the way. It is a clear path, and that is the way the thoughts go. For that to change, we have to, and this applies not just to our husbands, but for everybody. For this to change, for thought patterns that are so ingrained to change, it means you have to create a new path. And it's just like creating a new path in the forest. It is hard. You're not just going to create a new path that is clear and easy without any effort. You're going to have to take in heavy equipment. You're going to have to chop down trees. You're going to have to pull out weeds. You're going to have to do a lot of work. And so we as wives need to understand that these are not patterns that can be changed overnight. It's not going to change in 1 month of therapy sessions. It's not going to change in 2 months or 6 months or even a year of speaking with a spiritual director or your priest, because they took a lifetime to create, especially during times when our brains are little and they're so easily formed into creating habits. This is hard work. So while I am bringing this to your attention and I'm bringing these kind of situations to light, just because I can wrap this all up in a 30-minute podcast episode does not mean that our husbands can change, even if they are willing and ready and want to change quickly. It's not going to happen because we're fighting literal biology in our husband's brains because of the thought patterns that have been created, those well-worn paths that are created. And so for us to hope, and there's always hope, that our husbands can switch from this well-worn path to this brand new one overnight is very unrealistic. And I am very guilty of wanting an immediate change. Everybody wants an immediate change. We are in a microwave society. We want things to be done fast. And even we get impatient waiting for something to microwave for 30 seconds. So we have to realize that we are dealing with very difficult things to change. Not that they cannot change, because they absolutely can, but we have to extend grace when change takes longer than we want it to. And I think what we need to be looking for instead of a complete change is baby steps of progress. Okay, so he's knocked down one tree. Praise God. Praise God for that one little change. Maybe your husband doesn't respond immediately to his parents with a yes. Maybe he takes a few minutes and it takes a little bit longer. But we have to understand, and I'm going off track, but this is so important that we realize this. Because otherwise we have unrealistic expectations for change for our husbands, and that can lead to a lot of frustration and disappointment and even, fights. Because we want this change. We know our husbands, hopefully, say that they want to change. But change is hard, and it's not quick. It's not easy. And usually it involves a professional, maybe with EMDR therapy, maybe with other modalities that, work best, because it's not a one way, one size fits all kind of option. You'll have to find what will work for you and for your husband. It's not easy. So what happens when we have a divided house? When we have this loyalty where your husband is kind of going back and forth between you and your family and his parents. So Matthew is very clear. Our house cannot stand. Jesus says division destroys. It can destroy within the church. It can destroy within your city, your country, your culture. It can destroy your marriage. And marriage requires unity. It requires one flesh and requires a shared purpose. Now, when that loyalty is split, you can't build anything solid. Because if you're wanting to build something solid with your husband and he's constantly looking to mom and dad to please them, it's like he's turning his back on you. When he turns to face you, if you're watching on YouTube or Spotify, this will make more sense. But if I'm turning towards him, my back is going to be towards my parents. And if he turns towards his parents, his back is going to be to you. And that's just a very simple example, very basic, of how when that loyalty is split, you can't build anything together because your focus is going to be elsewhere. Now, when you're trying to create a life together, it can't work if he's trying to maintain the role that he had as a child, and perhaps the role that his parents expect him to continue to have. And Catholic teaching says that marriage creates a new primary family unit, not two equal families competing for priority. This is where my Target logo should come into play. I need to make a note to create that so I can have this visual example, because it really just makes so much sense. So what are you actually dealing with when you have this loyalty split? This isn't about him loving his parents too much. It's about him not understanding what marriage actually requires and dealing with those neural pathways that are solidly in place from his childhood. Now, your husband probably thinks that he can keep everybody happy, but what he doesn't see is that somebody has to come first. God first, spouse second, children third. Everybody else comes after. And when he's trying to keep mom and dad happy, it's oftentimes, if they're toxic, oftentimes it is at the expense of God and you and your children. And that split is not sustainable because eventually something breaks. And usually that is the closeness and the intimacy you have in your marriage and in your family. And your in-laws, your toxic in-laws, likely try to reinforce the split by punishing him emotionally, financially, spiritually, when he prioritizes you and your children. Again, I'd love to see some comments if you can relate to this, because I knew that there were issues, but I didn't ever really think about this punishment that came after. It didn't process in that way. Like, I knew that there were issues. I knew that there were strings attached. I knew that I felt like I was in this competition with his parents, which is not supposed to be how it is. But I didn't really think about how he was being punished by his family when he chose me and our children over his parents. So what we're not asking our husbands to do is we're not asking him to choose between loving us and loving his parents, because God created us in such an amazing way that our heart expands to love everybody that we need to love. But what we're asking him to do is to understand that our marriage requires reordering those priorities. Mom and dad can't come first anymore. It has to be God, you, and your children. Period. That's what a Catholic marriage requires. And so this split of loyalty between you and your in-laws keeps everybody stuck. But your husband is stuck most of all, because his parents have put him in this place where he has to choose between you and them. And that is, again, toxic in-laws. This is not healthy, normal families. Toxic in-laws are going to try to force him to choose. And that's wrong. It's just wrong. So recognizing that this pattern exists doesn't fix it. But you can't address something that you can't see. So that's why I'm doing this podcast. I'm doing this. So next week, we're going to be talking about creating some space in your marriage for it to breathe. Because we need this white space in our calendars, even if it's just our mental calendars, to be able to figure out how we want our marriage to look, how we want our families, what we want them to look like, without this outside influence coming in and making demands and making accusations and causing this stress that does not belong there. Marriage is stressful enough. Trying to, pair up two imperfect people with their very imperfect children and this very imperfect union, and trying to make it work is hard enough, let alone when you have these outside influences trying to disrupt things and put them in an order that they're not supposed to be in. And so if you left a comment, if you resonate with all of this, I want to invite you to the Catholic Wives plus Toxic In-Laws community that I have at toxicinlaws.com. No dashes, just toxicinlaws.com. And it is a free community where you can just come and connect with other women who get it, who understand what this is like to feel like you are in a competition with your in-laws. And they understand what it's like, and the toil and the burden and this heavy cross that you bear by being in this kind of family dynamic. There is a paid option to upgrade if you want a deeper dive into certain topics. We've covered healthy boundaries. We've talked about how to deal with the holidays with in-laws who are just making demands on you that you're just not willing to or able to meet. We also talked about self-care. We've talked about legal protection, which unfortunately our family has had to do a lot of learning and experience with that. But that is a place, a safe place for you online to be with other women who get it. So like I said, this is your invitation. Please come to toxicinlaws.com and find your community. Find a place where you can feel validated, where you can feel seen and heard. This is not a husband bashing place. This is not even an in-law bashing place. This is a place to connect with other Catholic women who are trying to live out this vocation in a way that honors God, honors our husbands, and even honors our toxic in-laws, so that we can all get to heaven. Because really that should be our goal, right? Is for all of us to get to heaven. So come in, join us at toxicinlaws.com. God bless you. Go in peace. Disclaimer. All content and information on this podcast and our website, including our programs, products, and or services, is for information and educational purposes only and does not constitute professional medical, psychiatric, or mental health advice of any kind, and does not establish any kind of professional client relationship by your listening to this podcast or use of my website. A professional client relationship with you is only formed after we have expressly entered into a written agreement with you that you have signed, including our fee structure and other terms to work with you in a specific matter. Although we strive to provide accurate general information, the information presented here is not a substitute for any kind of professional advice, and you should not rely solely on this information. Always consult a professional in the area for your particular needs and circumstances prior to making any professional, medical, or mental health related decisions.